Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. The storm that night came without warning. One minute the house was quiet, just the low hum of the TV and the soft tapping of rain on the windows, and the next, everything went black. The lights flickered once, then died completely. I remember standing there in the living room, holding my breath, feeling the darkness swallow every corner. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard his voice low, uncertain. "Are you still there?" It was my stepson, Ethan. We weren't exactly close. He was 20, quiet most of the time, always keeping to himself. But that night, in the pitch-black house, something about his voice felt different. It wasn't just fear, it was something else, something that made my heart skip. I grabbed a flashlight, though the batteries were weak, and made my way toward him. The beam of light trembled against the walls, shadows moving like they had a life of their own. When I reached the kitchen, he was standing by the window, his phone light barely glowing. His hair was damp from the humidity, his eyes catching what little light there was. "The power's out everywhere," he said softly. "Even the street's dark." I tried to smile, to calm him down, but even my voice felt strange, too quiet, too careful. The silence that followed was thick, like the world had stopped breathing. We decided to light a few candles. The warm glow filled the space, making the kitchen look smaller, more intimate. I could hear the rain against the roof, the occasional rumble of thunder rolling through the distance. The two of us sat across from each other, unsure what to say. It's strange how darkness can make you notice things you never saw before, the way someone's voice trembles when they talk, the way their eyes hold yours just a second too long. Then the wind howled, shaking the windows, and the last candle flame flickered. Without thinking, Ethan moved closer, his shoulder brushing mine. I felt my pulse quicken. Maybe it was the storm, or the loneliness of the night, but there was something heavy in the air, something unspoken. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm near my ear. And in that small, fragile moment, he whispered something I'll never forget. But before I could respond, the power came back on. The lights flickered to life, flooding the room in sudden brightness. We both froze, caught in the awkward silence that followed. Whatever was about to happen or be said vanished into the hum of electricity returning. After that night, things between us didn't go back to normal. The words he whispered, those quiet, trembling words, kept replaying in my head. I couldn't shake them off, no matter how much I tried. Every time I looked at him, I saw that same look in his eyes, that same uncertain warmth hidden behind his usual calm. It was as if the power outage had opened a door we both didn't mean to step through, but neither of us could close it anymore. The next morning, the house felt different. The storm had passed, but the air was still heavy, and the smell of rain lingered through the open windows. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, pretending everything was fine. I poured myself some coffee, trying not to stare, but every small movement he made caught my attention, the way his fingers tapped on the mug, the quiet sighs between his breaths. We talked about nothing for a while, the weather, the storm, how long the power was out. But under every word was an unspoken weight, a strange closeness that neither of us wanted to admit was there. When our eyes met, even for a second, one of us would look away. It wasn't discomfort exactly, it was more like confusion. Later that day, he offered to help fix the outdoor lights that had gone out in the storm. I watched from the porch as he climbed the ladder, the sunlight hitting his face. There was something grown-up about him I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was because I had always seen him as a kid who stayed in his room, headphones on, distant. But that day, he seemed different, steadier, more present. When he came down, his hands were covered in dust and wire grease. I handed him a towel, and for a moment, our fingers brushed. He smiled faintly, that small, knowing kind of smile that says more than words ever could. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. It wasn't something I had planned or wanted, but it was there, quietly growing in the spaces between our conversations. Over the next few days, the house felt strangely alive again. We talked more, small things at first, then deeper. He started asking me questions about my life, things he had never seemed curious about before. I told him stories from when I was younger, about mistakes I'd made, and he listened like every word mattered. Sometimes he'd laugh, and that laugh, it did something to me. It softened the quiet moments. But every night, when the lights went out, the memory of that whisper came back. It followed me into dreams, into the stillness of early morning. I'd find myself wondering if he remembered it too, if it meant the same to him as it did to me. One evening, while washing dishes, I saw his reflection in the window behind me. He was standing there, watching quietly, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. The room felt smaller again, the way it had during the storm. I turned, and for a second, it felt like time stopped. He finally spoke, voice low but steady. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Is it because of that night?" I didn't know how to answer. My hands were still wet from the sink, my heart suddenly racing. The truth was, yes, it was because of that night. Because of the words he said that still haunted me. But saying that out loud felt impossible. So instead, I smiled softly and said, "Maybe a little." He nodded, eyes lingering just a little too long before walking away. And in that silence that followed, I realized something. The night we got stuck in the dark hadn't ended. It was still there, hiding between us, waiting for one of us to finally face it. After that short conversation in the kitchen, things only grew more complicated. I told myself to forget it, to treat everything as normal, but normal didn't feel possible anymore. Every small interaction between us carried a different kind of weight. The way he'd linger in the doorway before leaving for class. The way he'd ask if I'd eaten, or if I needed help with something simple like groceries or the yard. It wasn't just politeness anymore. There was care in his voice and a quiet kind of attention that made me question what he was really thinking. But the more I tried to keep my distance, the more life seemed to push us together. A week after the storm, his car broke down on his way home, and I had to pick him up. The rain had started again, light but steady, and we sat in the car for a moment before going inside. The sound of raindrops on the windshield filled the silence between us. He looked out at the dark street and said quietly, "It feels like that night again." I didn't respond. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for something, an answer, maybe, or a sign that I remembered too. But before I could speak, he gave a small smile and said, "Never mind." "Forget I said that." Inside the house, I tried to act casual, making coffee and talking about fixing his car. But my thoughts kept drifting back to that whisper from the night of the blackout. What did he mean? Why did it still make me feel this strange mix of warmth and confusion? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice in my head. So I went downstairs for water and found him sitting on the couch, headphones on, staring blankly at the TV that wasn't even playing anything. He looked lost in thought, his face lit by the dim lamp beside him. When he saw me, he took off his headphones. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. I nodded, and he motioned for me to sit. For a few moments, we didn't say a word. The quiet between us was soft, but charged, like both of us were waiting for something neither wanted to start. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You ever feel like some moments are supposed to mean something?" I turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. "Like, the things you don't plan. The nights you don't expect. They stay with you." His words felt heavier than they sounded. It was clear he was talking about that night, about the whisper we both hadn't brought up since. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, "Yeah, some things stay." We sat there for a while longer, just listening to the rain. I could feel the tension rising again, that same feeling from the storm, the one that made the air feel thick, almost electric. But before either of us could say anything else, his phone buzzed. It was a message from someone, maybe a friend or a classmate. He stood up quickly, muttering something about needing to reply, and walked off toward his room. As soon as he was gone, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The days that followed were quieter, but the distance between us wasn't about space. It was about everything unsaid. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me when he thought I didn't notice, and I'd pretend not to see. It was safer that way. Yet deep down, I knew we were both still standing in that same dark moment, trapped between what happened and what could happen next. The tension between us had grown quiet but heavy, like the calm before a storm. Days passed, yet the memory of that night and his whisper refused to fade. Every look, every small conversation carried that invisible thread of something we both felt but never spoke about. It was like we were walking on the edge of a secret neither of us was ready to admit. Then one evening, the power went out again. It was almost eerie, like fate was repeating itself. The lights flickered, and the house went dark, swallowing every bit of sound. I stood in the hallway, frozen for a second, before reaching for my phone's flashlight. My heartbeat quickened when I heard footsteps approaching, slow, familiar. "Is that you?" I asked softly. "It's me," Ethan's voice answered from the dark. It was calm, but there was something else in it this time, something steadier, almost deliberate. When the light caught his face, I saw that same look from before, only deeper. The air between us thickened again, like the night itself was holding its breath. We stood there, only a few feet apart, the glow of the flashlight reflecting off his eyes. "Funny," I said, trying to lighten the moment. "It's like the storm's trying to remind us of that night." He took a step closer. "Maybe it is." My pulse skipped. The flashlight trembled slightly in my hand, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move with us. "You never told me," I whispered, "what you meant when you said those words that night." He looked at me for a long moment, searching my face as if deciding whether to finally say it. "I didn't think you wanted to know," he said quietly. "But maybe you already do." The room felt smaller again, the way it had before, the air warmer, the silence deeper. The candle I'd lit on the nearby table flickered, throwing uneven light across his face. I could hear the rain starting outside, soft at first, then stronger. The thunder rolled in the distance, echoing through the house. It was as if everything around us was waiting for whatever came next. Then the wind banged against the window, making us both flinch. The candle almost went out, the flame shaking wildly before steadying again. In that tiny circle of light, we stood frozen, caught between the pull of the past and the fear of what might happen if either of us said too much. "I can't keep pretending like that night didn't happen," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung there, sharp and trembling. Before I could answer, the lights flickered back on again, bright, almost blinding. We both blinked, the moment broken but still hanging in the air like unfinished music. And just like before, whatever truth was about to surface vanished into the light. For days after that second blackout, things felt like they were unraveling in slow motion. The air in the house was tense again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. It was heavier, edged with the memory of everything that almost surfaced that night. Ethan avoided my eyes most of the time, and I found myself doing the same, pretending that nothing was wrong. But the truth was, we were both waiting for something to happen, even if neither of us knew what that something was. It was a Friday afternoon when the twist began. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, a woman stood there, young, polite, and holding a box of Ethan's things. She introduced herself as Claire, one of his classmates. She said she was just dropping off the project materials they'd been working on together. Her tone was friendly, but I couldn't help noticing how comfortable she seemed saying his name, how easily she smiled when he appeared behind me. Ethan looked surprised, almost caught off guard. "Oh, hey Claire. I thought you said you'd bring that on Monday." She shrugged. "I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by." They talked for a bit while I quietly stepped aside, pretending to busy myself with the mail. But I could feel the tension building again, not jealousy exactly, but something close to it. Something that made me realize how much space he had started to take up in my thoughts. When she finally left, the quiet between us returned, heavier than ever. That evening, he found me sitting on the porch, staring at the fading sunset. "You didn't say much after Claire left," he said. I smiled faintly. Didn't have much to say. He studied me for a moment. "You're not upset, are you?" "Why would I be?" I asked, maybe too quickly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat beside me, his shoulder barely brushing mine. "Because I feel like something's changed between us," he said quietly. "And I don't know if it's good or bad." His words caught me off guard again. "Changed how?" He looked away, the evening light catching his face. "Like we're both pretending something isn't there." The honesty in his voice startled me. My chest tightened, torn between fear and understanding. The moment felt fragile, like one wrong word could break it completely. Before I could respond, thunder rumbled again in the distance. Another storm was coming. That night, as the rain began to pour, everything seemed to echo: the sound of water against the roof, the creak of floorboards, the memory of that whisper in the dark. I thought about what he said on the porch, and for the first time, I realized the truth might not be simple. Maybe it wasn't just about that night anymore. Maybe it was about everything we hadn't said since. Later, I went to check if the windows in the living room were closed, and that's when I saw something that made my heart stop for a second. Ethan's phone was on the table, still unlocked, with a message on the screen. It was from Claire. "I didn't tell her what you said, but you should." I froze, staring at the message, my mind spinning. What was he hiding? What had he told her? Just then, he appeared in the doorway, eyes shifting between me and the phone. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said softly. And before I could say anything, he added, "But maybe it's time you know the truth." The words hung in the air, the storm outside roaring louder as if echoing everything unsaid between us. The sound of the rain outside grew louder as we stood facing each other, the air thick with everything unsaid. His phone screen dimmed to black, but the words I'd just read were burned into my mind. "I didn't tell her what you said, but you should." My heartbeat felt uneven, my breath shallow. "What is it, Ethan?" I asked quietly. "What did you tell her?" He hesitated for a long time, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way," he said. "But that night, the blackout, I said something I didn't know how to take back." Claire was the only person I told afterward because I was confused, and I needed someone to talk to. The storm outside cracked with thunder, and for a second, it was hard to tell which was louder, his voice or my heartbeat. "What did you say?" I pressed. He took a deep breath. "I told her I was falling for you." The words hit harder than I expected, even though somewhere deep down, I think I already knew. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the reality of it sank in. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "I know how it sounds. I know it's not supposed to happen. But I couldn't stop it. You were there when everything else in my life felt distant." I stood frozen, torn between the shock of hearing it out loud and the strange, undeniable warmth that came with it. Everything made sense suddenly, the long looks, the hesitation, the whisper in the dark. Yet it also felt impossible, like something that could never exist outside that storm. "You shouldn't have told anyone," I whispered, barely finding my voice. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I thought if I said it out loud, maybe it would go away." But it didn't. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The candle on the table flickered again, and the rain softened, as if the world itself was waiting for what would happen next. Then, before I could respond, there was a knock at the door, sharp, unexpected. We both turned toward it. When I opened the door, Claire was standing there again, drenched from the rain. Her expression was serious. "I had to come," she said. "He didn't tell you everything." Ethan's face went pale. "Claire, don't." But she continued. "He wasn't just confused. He told me he thought you felt the same way." The words hung heavy in the air. I looked at Ethan, his eyes pleading silently for understanding, but my mind was spinning. The truth was, I didn't know what I felt anymore. The thunder rolled again, deep and distant, as we stood there in that fragile silence, three people caught in a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. The knock at the door had changed everything. For a few long moments, no one moved. The rain outside softened to a mist, the world suddenly calm again, but the air inside the house was still thick with tension. Claire's words echoed in my mind. "He thought you felt the same way." I looked from her to Ethan, who stood motionless, his face pale and eyes wide with the weight of what had just been exposed. "I shouldn't have come," Claire said quietly after a pause. "But I couldn't let this end with half-truths." She looked at me, her voice gentler now. "He's not trying to hurt anyone. He just doesn't know how to deal with what he feels." Ethan's shoulders dropped. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said softly. "That night, when I whispered those words, it wasn't planned. It just came out. I was scared you'd hate me, so I kept it inside until it started to eat me alive." The storm had ended outside, but inside, I still felt it quiet, unsettled, yet slowly clearing. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Ethan," I said gently, "you're not wrong for feeling something. But sometimes life puts us in moments that confuse care with something deeper. Maybe it's not love, it's connection. And that's okay." He looked down, his eyes glistening in the fading light. Claire gave him a small nod before stepping back toward the door. "You both need space to breathe," she said softly. "I'll give you that." And then she was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt strangely peaceful. Ethan sat on the couch, his hands clasped together. "I never wanted to make things complicated," he murmured. I sat across from him, choosing my words carefully. "You didn't. You just made things real. Sometimes we need moments like these to remind us what's missing or what we still need to understand about ourselves." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of everything was finally sinking in. "I think I understand now," he said quietly. "That night wasn't about love. It was about loneliness. I just didn't know how to tell the difference." The honesty in his voice softened something in me. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were both free from the silence, from the confusion, from the shadows that had followed us since that stormy night. The next morning, the house was bright again. The sky was clear, the air lighter. Ethan packed a small bag. He said he needed a few days to visit his father and think things through. When he left, he hugged me briefly and said, "Thank you for not hating me." I smiled, holding back a sigh. "Take care of yourself, okay?" As his car disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch, watching the sun rise through the fading mist. The storm was finally over. Sometimes life's most confusing moments aren't meant to define us, they're meant to teach us. So, what do you think? Was this the right ending? Should there be a sequel showing what happens if they meet again someday? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Summary: a quiet storm changes everything when a woman and her stepson are trapped in darkness. What begins as confusion turns into an emotional test of boundaries, honesty, and understanding. Through whispers, secrets, and truth, both learn that not every deep connection must turn into love. Some are lessons meant to heal.